Welcome back, boys and girls. Today we are going to be working on Project Shitbox. So Project Shitbox is a 1998 Honda Civic DX hatchback, otherwise known as EK. EK is somewhat of a misnomer, but they're this era or this vintage isn't right. This model version of Civic is commonly known as EK. Anyway, so a little bit about the car. I'll dig into it a little bit later. I'll just have a brief overview now. Bought it at an auction, at a salvage auction. Actually, it was a Copart auction for basically no money. And so we're running through it. I mean, the paint is absolutely blasted. It's got bumps and scrapes and dents kind of all over the place, but it is otherwise pretty clean. It's got 129,000 original miles, which is kind of low. And it spent its whole life in Tucson, Arizona, or at least as far as I can see from the sort of Carfax. As you can see, the engine compartment is pretty dang clean, and the underside is like perfect. Like the car has been, I mean, apart from the exterior, the car has basically been in a time capsule. The engine is freaking beautiful. It runs perfectly. And that's what's kind of a bummer is, well, not really a bummer. It's good for somebody. Kind of a bummer because we're tearing it out and putting in a K series. So this is, I kept it in here for as long as I've had the car so far, which is a couple of months. I haven't really smacked into it too much, although I did get moving with the, as you might have seen from a previous video, I did get moving with the front suspension and big brakes. I did also do some work on the rear brakes. I'm going to talk through that in a special video, but for this one, we're mostly looking at engine stuff. So I had kept the engine in this car for up until this point, as long as I've owned the car. For the reason of it runs perfect. Actually, when I got it, it would barely start, and all I did was, well, I ended up replacing the distributor, which, I don't know, I was just suspicious, because I figured, what else could it be? It was running when I picked it up, but I guess it was warm, or I don't know. If you just crank on it forever, it would eventually fire up. Anyway, I determined that it was not a fuel issue. And I replaced the ignition distributor. That didn't fix it because I figured, I replaced the distributor because I figured it's definitely not the spark plugs, because it's never the spark plugs. Why would it be a spark? Even if they were the original plugs with 129,000 miles, it's definitely not the spark plugs. Anyway, I pulled a plug and looked at it, and I was like, damn, that's definitely the problem. Replace the spark plugs with brand new ones, and it runs, it's unbelievable. It's perfect. I mean, you can see the thing is not, there's zero corrosion on any of the car. I mean, you can see these are the original fasteners. Like the zinc coating is still present on all the fasteners. It's a wet dream, at least from somebody like me from the Rust Belt. The only corrosion that is present is on the battery tray, which is understandable. But everything else, I mean, it's just, I mean, the heat shield is immaculate. I just can't get over it. It's wild. Anyway, so I kept it in the car so that I could sell it running, right? If I had ever gotten an opportunity to buy a motor that was in a car running, so I could know that it runs, well, that'd be great. In fact, that's why I prefer to buy a donor car. If I'm looking for an engine, I want to buy a donor car. I want to buy a salvage car. I want to buy a car that I know runs, or that I can see runs. If for no other reason than to know that it's fucked up or doesn't run right? Even if you buy an engine from a salvage yard and they give you a warranty and you can return it and get your money back, you go through a hell of a lot of trouble to get that in the car just to find out that it's got a fucking rod knock or whatever. So I figured I'd be able to get a bit of a premium for this engine if it was in the car running and I could show people that it runs. At least that was the idea. I don't know that actually works, but in any case, I got a buyer, so we're gonna We're going to pull this engine out today. It shouldn't take too long. I'm going to time lapse sort of most of it, and I'll try and show in more detail any of the interesting details, although I'm not exactly sure what interesting details there would be. So first things first, I will drain the fluid, so drain the engine oil. This is an automatic transmission. I guess I don't know much about them. I guess they got juices in there too. Drain the transmission, the engine, the coolant, and deal with the refrigerant, and then we'll open up the bottom of it. There should be a little, I haven't checked, I imagine there's a window in the bell housing or in the transmission where I can get to the torque converter bolts, spin the engine around, get all those bolts out, and then we should be good to drop it, disconnect the axles, subframe, all that stuff. Yeah, it's been a minute since I've done a D-series, but should be pretty straightforward, and let's get moving. I wanted to, so while we have the transmission draining, which there seems to be like fucking 500 gallons of transmission fluid in there, I wanted to show what I was talking about with the torque converter bolts for those who maybe haven't seen this before or aren't familiar. So you take this cover off, and so these fasteners here are basically, unlike a manual transmission, the torque converter, or in essence the automatic transmission, is bolted to the flywheel, or in the case of an automatic transmission, it's known as the flex plate. So you basically can't get them apart without unscrewing these fasteners, or maybe breaking or cutting something. So basically what we're going to do is unscrew these fasteners, and then we just turn the crank. You can't really see it. We'll just turn the crankshaft and spin the engine around to get all of them. I don't know how many of it. I don't know how many there are. Probably, I don't know, half a dozen or so. While we're under here, let me set this down. While we're under here, I can sort of show you what I'm talking about. And I mean, it's a little bit dirty or dusty or muddy, but what you might be able to see is there isn't even a whisper of corrosion under here. It's beautiful. So, yeah, really, really, really pristine around the fuel tank. No concerns whatsoever. I do need to give it a good power wash, and I'll show the results of that. But a little bit of dust, and that's it. I mean, this thing underneath is like brand new. It's fantastic. Even the control arms and stuff, everything under there is beautiful, quite frankly. And then we go back to the back of the car. I have, as you can tell, I've done some work on the rear suspension already. I'm not going to get into that now, but basically, sway bar, this sort of cross beam stiffening brace, control arms, coilovers, brakes, the whole lot. I'll get into that in a future video, but I just wanted to show you while I have this thing up here. So we got the engine oil out, transmission oil's draining, next the coolant and the refrigerant. Then disconnect all the bits. We'll disconnect the control arms and the axles. The control arms, the subframe, all that stuff's got to come out anyways. But disconnect the axles, and then we're off to the races. Okay, boys and girls, so what we have right now, we have our coolant lines, our bottom and top coolant lines disconnected. Our heater hoses are disconnected. Our wiring loom to the ECUs disconnected. So we still have the fuel. I'm going to wait till last to deal with that just because it gets fucking fuel everywhere. We got to deal with the AC. And then what I'm going to do is we're going to drop, as you can see, the rear engine mount there. We're going to drop the engine, transmission, cross member, and suspension all together so that the steering rack, the knuckles, brakes, and struts all come out together. One thing I'd like to do is we're sitting a little bit far back, so I think I'll put the car on its wheels just for a moment, roll it forward a little bit, just because we're going to be taking all the weight out of the chassis, and I just want it to sit a little bit more balanced on the lift. That's probably not a big deal, but I'll feel a little bit better about it. And then I need to disconnect the steering rack from the column in the inside of the car. And then we're ready to drop. Let's keep going. Alright, boys and girls, moment of truth. Let's see if we disconnected everything. Should be just sitting on the floor right now. Right. Okay, welcome back, boys and girls. So we got everything cleaned up. I spent the last couple of days just kind of cleaning things up. I got the motor and transmission out and cleaned up and separated. And so basically some of those more tedious bits that is either too straightforward for me to bother with or too complicated and tedious for me to try and make content on. But got the motor and transmission separated from all the suspension components, separated from each other. I got the motor off to its new owner, which was a pretty good deal because I sold that motor for $800. It was in really perfect running condition, 129,000 miles, runs like a Swiss watch. I bought this car for $750 plus a bunch of fees and stuff, so you kind of can't beat it. But still working on the engine bay, a lot of cleanup to do. I did clean the underside and like the wheel wells and everything, so you'd see what I'm talking about. It's pretty clean and tidy under there, and the other side is pretty much the same story. So where I'm from in the Rust Belt, this is literally unheard of, but in Arizona it's kind of a normal thing. So, and let's go around to the interior. Interior isn't totally stripped out, but the carpet's got to go. The seats are out, and so we'll just work through that. While I was sorting out the powertrain and the stripping out of this car, I was on the internet and I found this. So this was a find from a salvage auction, so an insurance auction. It was wrecked, if you can tell. I'll put in a screenshot of what it looked like before. And so, yeah, it was already, I mean, it looks pretty rough now, but it started out looking pretty rough. This is a, if you can't already tell by the gauge cluster, this is a Acura RSX Type S, and it was hit pretty bad in the front, and it was not advertised as running and driving. Which is somewhat obvious when you look at the the pictures from the passenger side. But I figured it was worth taking a risk. It didn't come with any keys, but luckily I have a stock, an OEM ECU, and I've been carrying this thing around for years, a stock OEM steering column in ignition, which is necessary in order to disable the immobilizer. So what you can see there is I have my wiring from this car wired up to the column that I had just laying around, and then I have that its accompanying ECU plugged in, so that basically this is the ignition and ECU that belong together, and they were from a different car because I didn't have the keys for this car, so therefore I could start it. I cut some of the bodywork away, or some of the frame rail away, and it does run. However, when I started it, it fired right up, and then it started to immediately rev high. And what I found was, if you can see, so you can see these fasteners just hanging out there just to hold their place. This cover belongs on the underside of the intake manifold, and what I saw, I just started checking for leaks because it started to rev really high, and what I saw was this hole punched right in there. So as soon as I saw that, I thought, well, so that was clearly a hole made by some parts of the some aspect of the structure of the car encroaching on the engine. It didn't seem to make any noises, seems to run fine, but it revved right up immediately. And then once I saw that, my concern was, well, where are the pieces from that hole? So I saw one little piece, but then another little piece of material that, that was broken from that hole. I don't see it. So I don't know if it went inside the engine. I have to presume that it did. I don't know when it did that. Did it do it when I started it? Did it do it, shortly after the crash? I don't know. But I'm thinking, yeah, if it hasn't already caused damage, maybe it's sitting in one of those cylinders. I will throw a borescope down there and see if I can see something, because it'd be nice if I can get that motor, run it for a minute or two and just listen for issues, and then you can at least have a peace of mind there's nothing major wrong with it, and maybe I'll choose not to tear it down. But if I don't find that piece, I'm more inclined to tear it down. So we'll see what happens there. It does turn. You can feel it's making compression. It runs in the couple of seconds that I let it run. Didn't make any weird noises, so that's a bonus, because in a lot of these salvage auctions, they'll run the car if they can, and they'll take a picture of the instrument cluster while it's running, and so you can check, that it's idling, and most importantly, is the oil light on. So I didn't notice whether everything happened so fast. I didn't notice whether the oil light came on, and I don't want to keep running this thing if there's a chunk of aluminum flopping around inside one of the cylinders. I think that if it got sucked up in there, it may or may not cause an issue, right? Otherwise, as far as damage goes, that's as much as I was able to find. The sump looks okay. The only other thing that I noticed was this part of the transmission, one of the three mounting points, one of the three mounting bosses is broken. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do about that. I could probably just add on some weld material. That's what you get. That's the risk you take when you got something that's damaged so heavily in the front. Another thing I noticed, and the eagle-eyed of you will have also noticed, is this transmission code, W2M5. So this is indeed and when I saw that, I checked, wait, could that be right? And I checked the VIN. There's a VIN tag on both the engine and transmission, and this transmission does not match the VIN of the car. And that's because although the car is indeed a Type S, which from the factory was a 6-speed, this is an RSX base 5-speed transmission, which might sound like, hey, I got gypped, but in truth, that's actually a good thing. That's the transmission that you want. If you're, and I think I've said that before, if you're running a turbo car, making any kind of power north of 250 horsepower, to me personally, my opinion is the 5-speed makes more sense. The 6-speed, the gears are just too close together. And if you're making over 300 horsepower from 5,000 RPM or 4,000 RPM, so you have this huge power band. And with the 6-speed, you shift to the next gear, you're going third to fourth. It's kind of like you're shifting into the same gear. At least that's my opinion. So that's actually really good. These 5-speed transmissions are typically, not just me, but they're typically favored by other people that are running a turbo. So, hell, I don't know. Maybe I'll time lapse this. My plan is now, as far as this car goes, I guess I'll just roll this into the narrative. I don't exactly live in an upscale neighborhood, but this, my house is starting to look like a fucking junkyard. But in any case, I'm gonna bore scope the cylinders, see if I can find any pieces of something, and then decide whether or not I'm gonna try and run it for a couple of minutes and check various things about the motor, or if I'm just gonna pull it. In the meantime, I'll pull some of the suspension. I'll pull the knuckles just to have them around. Interior wise, everything's pretty thrashed with the exception of the seats. Passenger seat is in really good condition. Driver's seat kind of only okay. Airbags were deployed on this guy, and there was a lot of blood on the driver's side one, and there's still a bunch of blood on the door sill, which is, it's kind of the harsh reality of buying salvage wrecked cars. So hopefully whoever left that was hopefully they just walked away with a broken nose or something, because that's never a nice thing to see. So anyway, I'll just carry on tearing stuff apart, and I'll give you an update the next time around. Thanks for watching.